Jamaica's finance minister gets a big up job. What are the political and the financial and economic implications for Jamaica? Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dionne Jackson-Miller. Stay tuned. So the big news coming out of Jamaica is that Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clarke is to take up a job as Deputy Managing Director at the International Monetary Fund, yes, the IMF, and that will be as of October 31, 2024. That's in just about 2 months from now. So it's big news for him and it's big news for Jamaica. In a statement congratulating him, Prime Minister Andrew Holness said that no citizen of Jamaica, the Caribbean, or Central America has ever served at such a senior level in the IMF in its 80 years of existence. So like I said, a big deal. So what are the political implications and what are the financial and economic implications of this move? Well, at the very basic political level, the Jamaica Labour Party has already announced that Dr. Clarke will be replaced in the St. Andrew Northwest constituency, where he serves as MP. He's going to be replaced by Councillor Dwayne Smith, who they say will be the JLP candidate in the general election that's due next year. Now, this is not a surprise. Dr. Clarke won the seat by about 72% of the vote in the 2020 election, so it's not regarded as a vulnerable seat. It had been held for years before him by the JLP's Derek Smith. Dwayne Smith now is the son of Derek Smith, and he had wanted the seat from a long time. So the wider political question, though, is whether replacing Dr. Nigel Clarke, having to replace Dr. Nigel Clarke as finance minister, will rock the boat and cause problems for Prime Minister Andrew Holness. Mr. Holness is looking to try to bring home a third electoral victory for himself and his party, and Mr. Clarke's financial acumen, as well as his reform-minded governance, had been seen as a significant advantage for Mr. Holness and for the Jamaica Labour Party. Dr. Clarke's qualifications are stellar, right? There's no question about that. Apart from everything else, he had been Ambassador of Economic Affairs for Jamaica before he was a finance minister. He also served as chairman of the National Housing Trust, the Port Authority, as well as the Heart Trust, and he was a director of the Bank of Jamaica. But apart from what he looks like on paper, Dr. Clarke has a really good reputation as Jamaica's finance minister. He steered the country through the COVID-19 crisis. He spearheaded public sector salary reform, as well as important governance reforms like the reform of public sector boards and, of course, the improvements in the economy as well. So Mr. Holness's choice of his replacement is going to be key. Remember for a moment that the finance minister has to be a member of parliament. He has to have a seat in the House of Representatives, because you may have heard the axiom, no taxation without representation. The finance minister has to be an elected member of parliament. And that might seem as if it would narrow Mr. Holness's options a little bit. Not really though, because in the political world, if there's somebody that a prime minister really wants as his finance minister, ways will be found to find a seat for that person, notably a safe seat, because you can't have your finance minister in a precarious seat. That could go either way. So I don't see that as a sticking point. The prime minister really does have a fairly wide net if he chooses to cast it. But let's start by looking at his choices in his current cabinet. And of course, one of the names that is going to jump out at you is the current Education Minister, Favour Williams. Now, Favour Williams is a chartered financial analyst. She has an MBA with a concentration in finance. She has a ton of experience in the financial sector. She's a former executive director of Kingston Properties. She was chief investment officer at JMMB, and in the States, she has been a senior vice president at Putnam Investments and some other positions. Of course, most importantly, she's also a former minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Finance, so she has that Ministry of Finance experience. Now, there are a couple other people that you could see as potential, as possibilities as well. There's Senator Aubin Hill, who is currently the minister who deals with industry and commerce. Now, he is an international banker. He's known to have years of experience. And what about the newcomer, Dr. Dana Morris-Dixon? She's currently in charge of digital transformation. But again, when you look at her resume, you see lots of business and finance experience. She has a first degree in economics. She has a master's in government. She has a PhD in international studies. And also, she was managing director of JN General Insurance, and she was seconded from the JN Group to come and spearhead the government's development of its national risk assessment, which was part of the action plan that the government had to put together for the Financial Action Task Force. Having said that, though, I think we can rule out Senators Hill and Senator Morris Dixon. Why? Because the fact that the Jamaica Labour Party has already come out and announced that Dwayne Smith is going to be the representative for the party in the constituency means that the Prime Minister does not need a seat for the incoming Finance Minister, which of course suggests that the incoming Finance Minister already has a seat in Parliament, which takes us right back to Favour Williams. And I really do think she's at the head of the stream as far as possibilities is concerned. So am I right? Am I wrong? Is there somebody I'm overlooking? We'll find out soon enough. Now, there's a lot at stake here. There's the issue of managing the economy, but there's also the issue of completing the process of public sector reform. We already have groups like the Civil Service Association as well as the doctors who are saying that they're unhappy because there are key elements of their compensation packages that still have not yet been worked out. So whoever comes in as finance minister is going to have a steady hand as well as a whole heap of diplomacy to see this process through. And what of Dr. Clarke himself? Obviously, as we said, it's a big move for him, but I'm sure it's not the end move. Remember, it's somebody we're into chess. So at a time when a lot of other people playing checkers, he might very well be playing chess. And what do those long-term chess moves look like? Might they look like him doubling back to Jamaica at some point to go even further into politics? Well, guess we're going to have to wait and see, but it certainly doesn't seem beyond the bound of possibility. So here are some reactions to news of the appointment of Dr. Clarke to the IMF. The opposition People's National Party congratulated him, calling the appointment a notable achievement for Jamaica on the world stage. But they went on to say that the development raises significant concerns about the future of Jamaica's economic management and leadership. They said that Dr. Clarke's departure is coming at a critical juncture for Jamaica, which is facing serious economic challenges, including spiraling cost of living and the negative growth impact of the recent hurricane. And they're asking if his move signals the abandonment of a sinking ship. Now, the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, who is also a former president of the Central Bank of Belize, his name is Ilan Golfage, I hope that's how it's pronounced. He called Dr. Clarke one of the most successful and experienced policymakers in Latin America and the Caribbean and says he'll be a great asset to the IMF and its members. Corporate governance expert Cecile Watson called it a well-deserved honor and distinction for an esteemed son of Jamaica. Elon Parkinson of Digicel said it's another superb and uplifting example of how Jamaica punches well above its weight. And just to note that the appointment is especially interesting given Jamaica's sometimes fraught relationship with the IMF, coming from the 1970s and all the trauma that was associated with the IMF. We're coming from a situation where by 2013, Jamaica had a debt to GDP ratio of about 147%. Means that we were one of the most indebted countries in the entire world. And of course, the IMF program eventually, not the first one, but the one that eventually helped to right the ship, made Jamaica an unlikely poster child for the IMF. This is what the IMF said about Jamaica on its website. It says, the public said enough is enough. That's the Jamaican public. The Economic Program Oversight Committee was formed so that stakeholders from the private sector, unions, government, academia, and the media could come together to hold the government accountable for its reform commitments and fiscal discipline under the reform program. With that, this is still reading from the IMF website, as described by Finance Minister Nigel Clarke, what began as an IMF program became Jamaica's program with IMF support. Not so surprising then maybe that Dr. Clarke is now headed to the IMF. What happens now? Let's watch and see. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm Dionne. I'll see you next time.